This is the grammar lesson that will change your life. Because let's face it, English, which is the global language, is important for people to learn and use. And I am the person who is going to teach you all about the relative pronouns that, which, and who. And I'm sure you heard me emphasize these words as you were just listening to me. And these pronouns are very important because there is some debate as to how they should be used when it comes to formal or informal or written English versus spoken English. Let me give you an example. I don't like the dog bit me. Which pronoun should we use? And normally I would say which one is correct, but in this lesson I don't want you to think about grammar in terms of correct and incorrect. Instead, I want you to think about it more in terms of acceptable versus unacceptable, and then you're going to have that spectrum in between. So which answer do you think is more acceptable? And I will tell you in just a moment. But it's important to know why. Because when you know this and you know why an answer is more acceptable or more often used than others, it's really going to help you dramatically improve your grammar skills, have a better understanding of the language, and you won't make simple mistakes when you're having a conversation or when you're writing. And if you are someone who would like to improve your grammar, please subscribe, turn on notifications. That way I can become your teacher. My name is Wes. The channel is Interactive English. It's all about trying to help you reach your fluency goals. And be sure to stick around because I'm going to give you a mini grammar quiz at the end to see just how much you've learned. So let me give you a quick overview of that, which, and who, because these pronouns sometimes may seem interchangeable, but it can be a little trickier than you think. In general, you're going to use that when referring to people, animals, or things. You're going to use which when referring to animals or things, and you will use who when referring to people. And I'm sure you notice that that is more often used than the other pronouns because it overlaps with which when talking about animals or things, and it overlaps with who when talking about people. So let's dive deeper so you know how and when to use these words. And I am from the United States, so just know that the recommendations that I'm going to give you, it's more related to American English, and I will try to point that out as we go through the lesson. Now, the relative pronouns that, which, and who are going to come at the beginning of a relative clause. And you're starting to hear the word relative a lot. So what is a relative clause? A relative clause gives us extra information about a noun. It is a dependent clause, so it has a subject and a verb, but it cannot stand alone as its own sentence. And as I already mentioned, it's going to begin with a relative pronoun. In every lesson, I always ask you to hit the like button. And if you're ever wondering, well, where is the like button? I would say just hit the like button that is right below this video. So that last part that is right below this video, that is a relative clause. It begins with the relative pronoun that. It's just giving us more information about the word button. I'm telling you the location of it. And it's just a quick example, but maybe subconsciously I'm trying to get you to hit the like button. But let's just sum up quickly. So we have a noun that is modified by a relative clause. And that relative clause is going to begin with a relative pronoun. Are you with me? Here are some sentences that we can combine using a relative clause. I don't like the dog. The dog bit me. I don't like the dog that bit me. All right, there's your answer to the question at the beginning. Or we have the sentence, I plan to go running. It's a great stress reliever. I plan to go running, which is a great stress reliever. So I combine the sentences using a relative clause, except in one sentence I use that, and in the other sentence I use which. And maybe you're wondering, are they interchangeable? And in this case, I would say no. So let's talk about why and look at the difference between that and which. It really depends on whether or not the relative clause is restrictive or non-restrictive. And it pretty much means what it says. If the relative clause, that extra information, is restrictive, well, that means that it is necessary in order for us to understand the sentence. And we really need that information. If the relative clause is non-restrictive, well, then it's not necessary. It's optional. You can leave it in or you can take it out. So if the clause is restrictive, you should use that. I don't like the dog that bit me. All right? We need this information to help us understand, well, why I don't like the dog. But we could also assume that, well, maybe there's more than one dog. And I'm talking about that dog that bit me. Or if I said computers that are used for gaming are usually more expensive. So not all computers are used for gaming. So again, we need this information. So in both of these sentences, I have a restrictive relative clause that begins with the relative pronoun that. Now, I will say, and this is where we're talking about acceptable and unacceptable. It is acceptable to use which. I could say, I don't like the dog which bit me. However, in most English varieties, using that is preferred, especially in the United States. I don't know why, but Americans, we love using that. I just want you to be aware of this. Now let's look at some non-restrictive clauses, which once again, this information is optional. It may be interesting, but we don't really need it in order to understand the sentence. I plan to go running, which is a great stress reliever. So we can take this out, and it's not really going to change the meaning of the sentence or my plan. Or I could say my flight, which is tomorrow, has been delayed. And again, this is good information to have, but it's not necessary. And in this sentence, you'll notice that the relative clause comes between two commas. And this tells us that we're talking about a non-restrictive clause. So we can take that information out. Now, if you're having a conversation, you're not going to be able to see these commas. But one thing you could do is listen for that short pause. Or if you're speaking, you're going to make that short pause when you get to the comma. So if I were to just say this sentence naturally, I'd say my flight, which is tomorrow, has been delayed. Now, let's talk about the difference between that and who. And remember, these pronouns overlap when we're referring to people. And one thing you should know about who is that this pronoun is commonly used with both restrictive and non-restrictive clauses. When who is part of a restrictive clause, it may sometimes be interchangeable with that. Just keep in mind, if we're using that to refer to people, it's pretty informal. So if you're writing, which is a more formal way of communicating, I would not recommend using that. If you're writing, stick with who. But let's combine these two sentences. I told you about my friend Tom. He got a promotion. So he is the subject of my second sentence, and I can combine them using a relative clause and who. I told you about my friend Tom who got a promotion. Now, in this case, I would definitely recommend using who. I think using that sounds a little awkward for two reasons. First, we're actually saying the name of a person. When you're that specific, I would definitely recommend using who. The next reason is that we're talking about the subject of the sentence, and I will come back to that in just a moment. Now, even if we remove the name and take it away, and I say, well, I told you about my friend who got a promotion. If we're talking about the subject of the sentence, I would definitely recommend using who. So you may be wondering, when are that and who interchangeable in restrictive clauses? And this is really going to happen when we're talking about the object. Before, we were talking about the subject. So if I said, I don't know the man, you were talking to him. And I want to combine these two sentences with a relative clause. And man, that is the noun that we're going to add some information to. So if we're really being grammatically correct, I would say, I don't know the man to whom you were talking. But this sounds pretty formal, especially to American ears. But if we're talking about the object, which in the second sentence is him, we're going to use whom. I don't know the man to whom you were talking. Now, I didn't really include whom in this lesson, mostly because in the United States, except for in writing, people are not going to use it often in conversation. Instead, they're going to use who or that. So in this case, when we're talking about the object, that is when who and that may be interchangeable. And what happens is the preposition then goes at the end of the sentence. I don't know the man who you were talking to. or I don't know the man that you were talking to. So there's three different ways that you could say this. All of them are accepted. So the more formal, I don't know the man to whom you were talking. Or what I would refer to as just a more casual way of speaking, I don't know the man who you were talking to. Or a more informal way, I don't know the man that you were talking to. So when referring to people and we're talking about restrictive clauses, if we're referring to the object, this is when that and who may be interchangeable. And personally, I would recommend using who because I think that is what is more commonly used. And when who is part of a non-restrictive clause, it is not interchangeable with that. You are always going to use who. But once again, it's a non-restrictive clause, so this extra information, it's optional. I could say, my teacher who taught me in high school retired last month. It's good information to have, but it's not necessary. Or Anna, who's from Brazil, is pregnant. Okay, it's good to give more details, but again, it's not necessary in order to understand the main idea of the sentence. So now that you have a better understanding of how we use that, which, and who, I want to test your knowledge with a mini grammar quiz. So I am going to give you a sentence and I want you to think about which relative pronoun best completes the sentence. And I want you to listen for it because at first I'm not going to show you the sentence. I just want you to listen. I'll give you a moment to think of your answer and then of course I will tell you the answer. Are you ready? I like the dress my mother made for me. I like the dress my mother made for me. What do you think? The answer is that. I like the dress that my mother made for me. All right. And then again, this is an example. I'm not talking about me. But this information is necessary. It implies that, well, maybe we're talking about more than one dress. So we're going to use that. Chicago, the largest city in Illinois, is not the state capital. Chicago, the largest city in Illinois, is not the state capital. So perhaps you were listening and you heard those pauses, which tells you that this is a non-restrictive clause, in which case you are going to use which. Chicago, which is the largest city in Illinois, is not the state capital. And in case you're wondering, Springfield is the state capital of Illinois. The next one, last week I saw Tiger Woods, is one of the greatest golfers of all time. Last week I saw Tiger Woods, is one of the greatest golfers of all time. So Tiger Woods is a person. I'm giving you the name, so you should use who. Last week I saw Tiger Woods, who is one of the greatest golfers of all time. Then we have, you should not use the bike, has a flat tire. You should not use the bike, has a flat tire. So this is a restrictive clause. We need this information because, well, maybe we're talking about more than one bike. You should not use the bike that has a flat tire. My cat, is 15 years old, scratched me yesterday. My cat, is 15 years old, scratched me yesterday. So even just hearing this, you could probably tell, like, okay, well, this information is not necessary. And we're talking about an animal, so we're going to use which. My cat, which is 15 years old, scratched me yesterday. It's a non-restrictive clause. Then there's this one. If you're traveling to India, you should visit my good friend, is living there. If you travel to India, you should visit my good friend, is living there. So we're talking about, well, friend, that is a noun, that is a person. We're going to modify that with our relative clause and use who as the relative pronoun. If you're traveling to India, you should visit my friend who is living there. And then this one, you should join the gym, is only 5 minutes away. You should join the gym, is only 5 minutes away. So I'm trying to tell you this and like give you extra information about the gym. You can see with that comma, of course, you want to use which because we're talking about a non-restrictive relative clause. You should join the gym, which is only 5 minutes away. So how did you do on the quiz? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed the lesson and you learned something new, please hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. So long.